Hello and welcome along to this webinar on developing your own project management practitioner competency model. My name is Sean Whitaker and I'll be taking you through this webinar, and I'm with Crystal Consulting. Let's start with an outline of what we're going to cover in the webinar. We're going to start with defining competence and how it's different from capability. A lot of people use the terms interchangeably, but they do in fact mean different things. And then we're briefly going to look at why we should even bother looking at practitioner competence, and also some of the benefits of developing competence in practitioners. I'm going to give you an introduction to some competency models that already exist, particularly focusing on the Project Management Institute's Project Manager Competency Development Framework. And then from that, we'll talk about the ways in which you can tailor or develop your own competency model. At the end of the session, you will have an awareness of what project management competence is, particularly with practitioners. You will have some visibility and an introduction to some of the more popular models that exist for defining and assessing competence in project management practitioners. And you'll also have some basic tools to begin developing or improving your own project management competency assessment framework or tool. Now, given the time constraints that we have for this webinar, we can't go into the topic in depth, but you will have a broad introduction and overview of what a competency model is and how to begin to develop your own one. If you do have any questions at the end of the webinar, please feel free to contact me. I'm always more than happy to chat. Let's start at the beginning and make sure we're all talking about the same thing. And let's look at the definition of exactly what competence is and how it's different from a capability. If we take a look at the PMI Project Manager Competency Development Framework from 2007, we can see that competence is defined as the demonstrated ability to perform activities within a project environment that lead to expected outcomes based on defined and accepted standards. So what we can see that it's doing is first defining standards and then measuring competence of the practitioners against those standards. Now, the difference between a capability and a competence is that a capability is just simply a description of a task that may be required of a project management practitioner. Competence is a measure of how well they perform that task. They may have low competence in the task or high competence in the task, but the capability is the description of the task. The competence is how well they perform that capability. So for example, you may want someone to have the capability to drive a car, but there are obviously different levels of competence that can be exhibited in the way that the car is driven. So keep that in mind. We're going to talk about a competence model, but it's closely related to capabilities because you're going to need to describe both the capability that's required and also the level of competence that must be observed or exhibited for each project management practitioner. Why bother? Why bother at all with project management competency or capability development, whatever you want to call it? Well, it's really important to remember that our projects, our programs, our portfolios are not delivered by robots. They're not delivered by processes, tools, methods, or techniques. Projects, programs, and portfolios are delivered by people. Individuals, and also individuals working together as a team. Now, each of these individuals is unique in terms of their personality, their attitude, their aptitude, and their current and future levels of competence. Identifying current levels of competence and planning for future level of competence make sure that every individual has the right skills at the right time, gains the right experience over time, and can be measured in terms of both their aptitude and attitude to make sure that they're matched up with the right type of projects, programs, or portfolios. The alternative to this is to simply appoint people randomly or without any method at all to different projects, programs, or portfolios. And if you don't give consideration to the competencies they do have, they may find themselves struggling and unable to do the tasks required to be successful in delivering those projects, programs, or portfolios. So if you can develop a competency assessment tool and you can measure your practitioners, you'll be able to allocate them to the right projects, programs, or portfolios. In terms of organisational benefits of having a defined competency development framework, you will have happier staff who feel they're being valued and supported with their own professional careers. And this will lead to a reduction in staff turnover and an increase in staff morale. This is particularly important for project management staff because one of the challenges that project management staff face is they know that their projects are always coming to an end. By investing in them over the life of the project, you'll increase the chances of retaining them at the end of the project and also upskilling them for their next project. And that increased competency leads to increased capability, which leads to more successful projects, and at an organisational level, that leads to organisational strategic success. So there's the link between practitioner competency and organisational strategic success. Also, having a defined project manager competency development framework will make your organisation and your projects more attractive to new staff. They'll see it as an added benefit of joining your organisation or joining your project. It also provides a rational and transparent basis for rewards, promotions, transfers, and succession planning, because you can make it clear to people in order to gain this reward or gain that promotion, you must demonstrate these competencies. And in order to demonstrate these competencies, you must have had this experience or this training. It makes it transparent and removes that mystery. Also, at an organisational level, an organisation can use competency development tools and a framework to ensure that it has the correct spread of experience and skills. It will enable the organisation to take a holistic look at all of the skills that it has and identify any gaps or where there's an overabundance of skills as well. So at an organisational level, it allows the organisation to have a balanced approach and the right spread of competencies that it needs. From a practitioner point of view, a defined project management career path is available and defined job descriptions. Now let's be honest, some job descriptions, including the one that you may have at the moment, can be woefully generic and don't actually list defined competencies and capabilities that you're supposed to exhibit in order to gain that job or hold that job. So having a competency development framework takes it a step further and makes it really clear in your current job description exactly what competencies you need to have to hold that job description. And for other jobs or promotions that you may want, it's really clear which competencies you must gain and be able to display in order to get that next job. And all of these link together to give the practitioner a defined and transparent career path within the organisation. It will also give a visible and defined developmental goals for the practitioner as well. This means that they can look at the next 12 months or 24 months in their own career development and see exactly which things they need to gain proficiency in. And that makes it easier for managers to make sure that the practitioners are getting the right experience or the right training to reach those goals. Obviously, if a practitioner has been given experience or training in a particular competence area, they will have increased confidence at completing the assigned tasks. This in turn leads to better delivery of projects, more successful projects, programs, and also portfolios. and it does contribute to a sense of an ongoing support for professional and personal development for the practitioner. Another thing to touch on very quickly is that from an organisational point of view, having a practitioner competency model is an essential and integral part of organisational project management maturity or capability. Higher levels of organisational project management maturity or capability are an indicator of greater project success. So therefore, if you do commit to and invest in the development of your own project management practitioner capability framework, you will be contributing to and reflecting higher levels of organisational project management maturity within your organisation. Here are some of the typical elements of organisational project management maturity. Obviously, there's strategic alignment, there's an approach to portfolio management which is appropriate, an approach to program management, a defined and repeatable approach to project management, a defined organisational project management methodology or methodologies, and also a defined and transparent practitioner competency development framework. All different and equally important elements of measuring organisational project management maturity. So let's move on to exactly what a competency assessment does. Any model for competency assessment, whether it's an off-the-shelf one or whether it's one that you develop yourself, will seek to assess, develop, and continuously improve practitioner and organisational project management competency and capability. It will define these things, measure these things, and report on these things, reporting on both strengths and weaknesses for improvement within both the individual practitioner and also the organisation. Performance-based competency standards typically address at least the following two questions. What is usually done in this occupation, role, job, profession by a competent performer? Now, of course, this could be aimed at entry-level project administrators, it could be junior project managers, senior project managers, project directors, heads of PMOs, program managers, whatever you want to call it. But you define what is usually done in this occupational role by a competent performer. And then what standard of performance is usually considered acceptable to infer competence for each of those competencies. Here are some examples of existing project manager competency models. The one we're going to be focusing on today is the Project Management Institute's Project Manager Competency Development Framework, the second edition. The third edition is due out late in 2016, and when it comes out, we'll update this presentation. There are also some other fantastic competency models from AIPM and IPMA. There's also the Project Performance Group out of Sydney, Australia, which has a very good one. And also, if you're not aware of it, the GAPS. So GAPS is an independent project management association, and simply search GAPS Project Management and it will take you to their competency model. We could go through them all, but it may just confuse you. They all have a lot of overlap between them and a lot of similarities. And by looking at the first one, the Project Management Institute's Project Manager Competency Development Framework, you'll get an overview of all of them. So from the Project Management Institute, we currently have the second edition of the Project Manager Competency Development Framework. As I mentioned earlier, it is currently being updated to the third edition to reflect things like the updated role delineation study on the tasks a competent project manager should be able to carry out, and also the updated talent triangle from the Project Management Institute. We expect the third edition of this document to be available in the second half of 2016, and as I already mentioned, once it is available, we'll update this slide deck to reflect it. What this framework does is provide for the definition, assessment, and development of project manager competence by defining and identifying the key dimensions of competence. It does this in 5 different areas: knowledge competences, performance competences, organisational competences, and industry-specific competences, as well as personal competences. Now, of these 5 different competences, 3 of them are provided by the framework. This is the knowledge, performance, and personal competences. So PMI gives you a description of the competencies that should be able to be exhibited and displayed and measured in this area. But what it also allows for is customization straight away for yourself with industry-specific competences. This is where you look at the exact industry you work in, the projects that you work in, and you list industry-specific competencies. These could be related to health and safety or environmental management or something like that that's specific to the industry you work in. And also organisational competences. These are the things that your organisation desires in its people, and this could be the type of cultural fit, things like that. So PMI provides a great deal of information about these first 3 things, but leaves these things for you to define. And that's why I like the model a lot, because it explicitly makes it apparent that you need to tailor the model to make it work best. All the other models that I did mention do the same. This one just makes it the clearest of them at all. So let's go through each of these knowledge, performance, and personal competences and have a look at exactly what they do. The first one, the knowledge competence, looks at what the project management practitioner knows about the application of best practice processes, tools, and techniques. And in this instance, it refers to the PMP exam specification, which is based on the project manager's role delineation study. This is carried out regularly by PMI, and it's always being updated to make sure it reflects the latest research on what competencies a project manager should have knowledge of. Proof of this knowledge competency is generally via a credential and accreditation like the PMP, or perhaps a master's degree in project management. So from the project manager's role delineation study, we have this. These are the tasks that a competent project manager should be able to display, be observed, and be measured on in order to demonstrate knowledge competence. Obviously, in this case, if they go on to sit the PMP exam, this would be assessed during that examination process. So you can see the tasks there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and some of the things that a competent project manager should be able to display. So for example, with task 4, a competent project management practitioner should be able to identify high-level risks, assumptions, and constraints based on the current environment, organisational factors, historical data, and expert judgment in order to propose an implementation strategy. So the competence is defined, and then what you'd be able to do is go and look at, is the practitioner, do they have any competence in this area? Do they have moderate, or are they proficient in this competence? And that way you can define it, the knowledge competence, and then measure it. The next one is the performance competence realm. And this is how the project manager actually applies that knowledge to meet the project requirement. So down here we're looking for observation and documentation. So we want proof this time. So the exam or any examination will determine whether they know about best practice. Performance competence uses observation to see whether they actually put it into practice and how well they put it into practice. So you'll go observe, you'll do team interviews, stakeholder interviews, you look at the documentation they actually put together and how good that documentation is, and that's how you assess the performance competence. The final of the 3 competencies provided by the PMI model is the personal competence. And this sets out how the project manager behaves when performing the activities. These are what we may call the soft skills of project management, and we know how important they are. So these are things like their communications abilities, their management and leadership abilities, empathy, EQ, all of those things which come into it. It's their attitudes and their core personality characteristics in the project, program, or portfolio environment. And once again, this is determined via observation and documentation. Things like interviews with team members, interviews with senior managers, of course the 360-degree review process, things like that will determine the personal competence. So there we have the knowledge, competence, the personal competence, all ready to go for putting it together. When it comes to tailoring the model, you do have those industry-specific and organizational competencies which exist to allow you to customize it. This is where you should put in your own industry-specific competencies and also the ones that your organizational wants. The industry-specific ones will definitely reflect the industry you work in, and as I mentioned before, they could relate to things like occupational health and safety or particular experience in a particular area. The organizational competencies could be behavioral things that fit in with your organizational culture, and you'll want those to be demonstrated as well. We have a model at Crystal which puts together all 5 aspects of this model, and it's completely customizable, and we will be updating that once the 3rd edition of the Competency Development Framework is released later in 2016. If you want a sneak peek at that, let us know and we'll send you a link, and it just takes you, I think at this point, to a SurveyMonkey site, and you can go through all of those questions as well. So now that we've had a look at the Project Management Institute's model, we'll just move on to how to develop your own model. Here are some tips on how to do that. First of all, recognize that there'll be some elements of your own competency model that'll be easy to develop and some will be hard. But commit to completing a whole model, which may mean you need to choose to buy or outsource the tough stuff. My recommendation here though is wherever possible, use internal talent and experience to develop it. This makes it part of your organizational intellectual property. When you start to bring in external sources such as consultants, you risk buy-in during the change management process for implementing this. And you also may lose some intellectual knowledge once the consultant leaves. Certainly, in advocating for my profession, use a consultant to help, but make sure that you keep it largely in-house. You must also recognize that your own model must ultimately reflect and deliver your organizational strategy. So don't make it solely focused on the practitioner's needs. It must map back to how do these competencies help us deliver our organizational strategic goals. And ultimately, it really should provide a source of competitive advantage for your organization over other organizations. Don't just meet the market, but exceed the market. Be the best that you can be. And obviously with your own competence model means that you'll define your organizational culture and the things that make you stand out from your competitors. Also, greater customization of your own model leads to greater competitive advantage as it's difficult to replicate. If you simply take an off-the-shelf one and put that in place, your competitors can do the same. Certainly start with an off-the-shelf model, but then tailor it and customize it to make sure it suits your organization. It's always a good idea to choose some established and respected project management standards and frameworks for legitimacy and of course access to credentials if credentials are part of it. Now there are many of them around. There's obviously the PMBOK guide from the Project Management Institute. They've obviously got things like the Program Management Standard and the Portfolio Management Standard, as well as some other practice guides. There are also the other BOKs, the APM BOK as well, which outlines a body of knowledge from an APM point of view. And bringing this all together in the next few years will be the development and release of more ISO standards. So we already have the development of the first iteration of ISO 21500 Guidance on Project Management. If you weren't aware of it, it was released in 2012 as a guiding standard. And typically ISO standards spend 3 to 5 years of their first part of their life as guiding standards before they're turned into normative standards. So we already have 21,500 released, and you can keep an eye out for the releases of the ISO standard for program management, the ISO standard for portfolio management, and also the ISO standard for a project manager competency development framework. These will all be happening over the next few years. Whatever you choose to use, align it with an established and respected project management standard and framework though. It'll give you a huge head start on the competencies, and of course if you do decide that practitioners need some credentials, it allows people access to those easily. Moving on, as you begin to develop your own career or competency development framework, go and have a look at your existing job descriptions and any existing career framework that you may have. Pull them out, take a good read of them. Are they generic or are they specific? My own personal experience to date is a lot of job descriptions are very generic. So start with those. Take the general and specific competencies contained in these documents and decide on ways to measure, observe, and record these if that's not already done. Now, starting or attempting to start with these documents may actually reveal some holes. And you may need to start by tidying up the basic job descriptions and career pathways. And that may lead to a bigger piece of work. But it's well worth making sure that they're all covered off. The alternative is to have a defined set of competencies that don't map back to any defined job descriptions and don't help with any career pathways. They're all interlinked. So first up, start with whatever existing job descriptions you have, standardize those, and develop your own career framework, clearly outlining what a junior practitioner is, a senior practitioner is, an expert practitioner is. Give them consistent job titles too, by the way. We often see organizations where the term project manager could mean somebody fresh out of university, or it could mean somebody with 20 years experience. So tidy all of those things up so they're clear and consistent. Next, you want to regularly renew your model and keep it agile enough to keep pace with any enterprise level change. Make sure it's supporting change within the organization, not hampering it. As you are developing it, involve the practitioners, and if you have one, the PMO in the development, audit, and improvement of this definition. Make it business-led, which means that it should heavily involve whatever side of your organization is focused on portfolios, programs, and projects. But there's a very close link between your human resources and organizational development departments. Don't do it in isolation from this. I have seen some PMOs who just went off and decided to do their own career development framework and define their own competencies and didn't map that back or even let the HR, human resources, or organizational development department know about it. And of course, it stops at this point because when it comes to things like remuneration or promotion, you need the human resources department on board. And you'll often find a specialist set of skills within human resources or organizational development departments that can actually help you build this model better. Whether it's defining job descriptions or agreeing on career frameworks or deciding on the unique mix of how any competency gaps are going to be filled, whether it's on the job experience, training, mentoring, coaching, whatever, you'll find your human resources professionals have a unique set of skills to help you with this. So definitely, as I've said here, make it led by the project management part of the business, but make sure it's done hand in hand with the human resources and organizational development teams. Obviously, you want to make sure this is documented and standardized and accessible. You don't want to hide this away from the practitioners and bring it out once a year and surprise them. You want them to be able to access it at any point so they can even do some self-assessments and see what competencies they should be able to display. And if you standardize the assessment process so it's clear if somebody scores below proficient or above proficient, why, and that it's not just based on somebody's gut feel, it gives the model more legitimacy. So when it comes to developing the assessment standards, make sure they're clear. Don't leave it as below proficient, proficient, or above proficient. Define exactly what that means. Make it crystal clear in that basis. And the final point I want to make is if your competency model is slowing your organization down through bureaucracy and unnecessary process, then you probably haven't got it right. Your competency model and the processes around it should support your organization to be more efficient. So make sure it's not process for the sake of process or bureaucracy for the sake of bureaucracy. Now, a note about timing and frequency of this. Competency assessment is not a one-off activity. It's an ongoing endeavor which actually starts right with recruitment. When you go out and recruit your practitioners at whatever level, whether it's junior or senior or expert, you look for certain competencies during the recruitment process. And then once they're onboarded, you make it clear to them what it takes to move between junior and senior practitioner, and they can tick it off. I've seen practitioners who exceed the competency development goals in each year simply because they can see what they are, and they get the experience and they get the training that they need to move up quicker than they would have if it was a mysterious thing done once a year at some sort of annual review. So make sure it's ongoing and that it starts with recruitment and helps practitioners move throughout their career frameworks. The outcome from all of this, if you do commit to developing your own defined project management practitioner competency development framework, is it will identify individual competencies and from that gaps in their competencies. And then you can focus any learning and development opportunities on those. Obviously, there are many ways to address competency gaps. On-the-job experience is always the best way to do it. Giving people experience in actually doing things. Getting them education in an area or training. Letting them undertake certifications, whether it's professional certifications like the PMP or whether it's a master's degree in project management. Getting them the certification and education that they need to help get the knowledge competencies up to speed. Also, coaching and mentoring is a very effective way to help fill those competency gaps. This goes two ways. This is giving somebody a coach or a mentor, and also allowing somebody to be a coach or a mentor to junior practitioners. So once you've got your competency model developed, you can then see what the gaps are and decide on the best ways to fill those gaps. As we come to the end of this webinar, here are some of my final thoughts. First, organizations achieve their strategic goals with successful projects. We know that. The gap between what we want to achieve strategically and what we do achieve strategically is done with projects. Competent and capable practitioners produce high-performing, competent and capable project teams. Competent and capable project teams deliver successful projects. Therefore, we can see that practitioner and organizational project management competency is a key contributor to organizational success. And competency development is not a cost, it's an investment in strategic success of the organization. And if you're looking to sell the idea of development of a defined competency development framework to C-level executives, that's the type of language to use. Focus on how it will help develop and achieve strategic goals. Some of the questions, though, that I'll leave you with, and that we'll cover in later webinars, and for you to consider as you do move ahead with the development of your own competency framework, what are the considerations to take into account for diversity? Gender, ethnicity, age, unconscious bias, whatever it is, and also sustainability in your competence model. How do you do this? And here's a more important question, and one that's often hard to answer. How do you measure return on investment for time, effort and money spent on competency assessment and development? Now we've got some answers to those questions, and if you want to talk more about those, please feel free to reach out. They are topics for a separate webinar though, and we will put those up in the next few months. So thank you very much. We've come to the end of this webinar. I hope you've enjoyed it and learned something. As I said at the beginning, it was intended to be a broad overview of competency development frameworks and the benefits of putting one in place. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. I'm always happy to chat about any aspect of project management. And if you need to talk in a more detailed form about anything I've mentioned in this webinar, just reach out. There's my email addresses down here, sean@crystal.consulting. Also, if you want a copy of this presentation in either PowerPoint or PDF form, please email me. The presentation is of course uploaded to the Crystal Consulting website. So thank you very much. We appreciate your time. And here's just a little bit of information about the company.